welcome to Senior Speak New Hampshire on your Concord TV, sponsored by AARP. I am Karen Ulmer Dorsch, the producer-host of this program and a volunteer for AARP, and I thank you for being with us today. I sincerely hope that you viewers are enjoying this holiday season and all of the wonderful traditions that you share with your loved ones. Because it is for many a season of giving, I felt it was appropriate to invite someone who might help you give the most special gift of all to your loved ones, and that is the gift of your life story. My guest today is Henry Quinlan, owner and publisher of Omni Publishing Company, and a New Hampshire resident with over 40 years of varied experiences in publishing. Currently, Henry is helping senior citizens self-publish their life stories as a memoir or an autobiography. Everyone has a unique story to tell, but unfortunately, only those of the famous seem to be written today, which means that so many of the great stories of ordinary people are being lost due to the convenience of social media and the separation of generations, often living great distances from one another. In my opinion, this is one of the key reasons for so many in our society today, especially our younger generations, feeling so isolated and lonely. They have no awareness of their family's history, and we are learning how very important it is for all of us to know that history. Journals and letters written by generations of my family, here and abroad, that were handed down to me, plus the oral histories that I heard from my parents and my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, have shaped who I am today and have kept me centered all of my life. And I suspect that there are a number of you viewers who can say the same. Henry's own life story is amazing, and I want to share just one of his many fascinating experiences with you to give you just a little idea of how very special my guest is today. While he was engaged in a publishing venture in the former Soviet Union in 1991, President George H. Bush asked Henry to organize the publishing of the children's book Make Way for Ducklings in Russia and the erection of the statues Make Way for Ducklings in Moscow. I've always loved visiting the original statues in Boston, and just knowing this little bit about Henry's story is a gift that I truly treasure. So without further ado, Henry, thank you so much for being with us today and starting us on this fun, exciting journey. Take us away.
Thank you, Karen. So, in more than almost 50 years now of publishing, I have learned, and again, I've given this talk more than 50 times to senior groups. I've learned that everyone has a story and it should be told. And today with technology, as we'll go through it and I'll explain, it's much easier than it ever was. I can fill an hour just telling you stories about, but one is really sums it up for me. So I gave a talk and this woman came up to me, she was about 5'2". She said to me, "Can you help me? I need some information for one of my daughters because she's had a very unique life." And I said, "Well, before we get into your daughter, let me ask about you. For instance, how old are you?" She said, "I am 76. I said, "Well, okay. How many children do you have?" And she said, 14. And they're all alive. I said, "Well,
wow.
If there isn't a story there, I've never seen one." So everyone, I don't care who they are, their education, their background, everyone has a story. So as Karen mentioned, my most unique experience was indeed publishing the book Make Way for the Ducklings in Moscow as part of a summit with President Gorbachev. And there they are in Boston, there they are in Moscow, exact duplicates. Nancy Schroen, the sculptress, made a duplicate set and brought them over to Moscow for the ceremony. And then Robert McCloskey, the author, came over and we printed his book in Russian. To be sure, we only printed enough for a ceremony, but it was really a great experience for all involved. So the benefits of writing your story, and there are many, and I'll start with this one. I've never seen anything energize a senior like writing their story. Nothing even compares. And we'll talk later about one 90-year-old man, another one 88, who did their stories at those ages, one man by hand. And it energized them like you can't believe. So, but there are a lot of benefits. You'll get to review your life and you go back in your memories. Did they happen or did they not happen? Maybe they happened in a different way. And that's a good thing. You resolve conflicts. A lot of times you look back at a conflict that's 10, 20, 30 years old and you say, really, it's not that important. Yeah. So you resolve it. And if we come to it, if you have a friend or a family member where there's really an issue, it's always best to go to them and say, I'm going to write my story and this is how I'm going to describe the issue, and try to resolve it that way. There's all kinds of side benefits, and it just is alive. I'll give you the story of my mother. I did an oral history with my mother at 92. She resisted that, and it took me a long time, and then she finally agreed, so I would go every Monday with a tape recorder and ask her a series of questions. It wasn't before long when I would sit down on the particular Monday and she would start off, and she had been thinking about it and she was fully engaged at that point. And that's the process that happens. So there's a lot to do with the writing your story. There's always a point with pain. And many people stop at that point. They can't go forward. So what are the ways to get around that? The best way is to leave your manuscript and start writing it just from the gut. Totally just let it all out. Put it aside and then go back in about 5 to 7 days. Some people will go through that process 8 or 9, 10 times. But they finally get it to the point where they feel comfortable and they put it into their story. One of the reasons this is an important feature is that people who know you are going to say, what happened? Why isn't this in? Because they know it's an important part of your life. And really what the family and your heirs want to know, if it's an issue where you had a failure of some kind, they're not so interested in that. What they want to know is, how did you get out of it? What are the strategies you use? So those are some of the things, tips in writing your story. You want to leave your legacy. Karen and I were just talking. Your kids know something about your life. Your grandchildren know nothing.
Yes. And
so it's really important for you to tell your full story and let them enjoy and learn the lessons from your life. This room can be filled with the reasons to write the story. I don't care what they are. I believe in it. If you want to do it, you just should do it. You don't need an excuse. I just want to tell my story. Everyone's different. I've done a very intimate book for a man. He said, all I want is 10 members of my family to read it. And that's a whole different thing. The next man, he was so happy with his book. He ran all of Ted Kennedy's campaigns. He wanted to come out from behind the screen, so to speak, and tell his story. That's legitimate. This man was involved in a lot of legal fights. He lost them, but he still was proud that he took it all the way to the Supreme Court. He wrote a book about his legal experiences. He was so happy, he printed 5,000 copies and gave himself a publishing party at Mar-a-Lago down in Palm Beach. Everyone is different. This woman was a poet, and she wrote a book of poetry, but only for her family and friends, 100 copies. So whatever you want to do, you have that flexibility, and remember, it's all about you. So you have 3 choices: an autobiography from your death, from your birth to death, or today. A memoir. A memoir is a slice of your life. So if you want to write about your time as a parent, or your time as a professional, or your time as an athlete, that's a memoir, just a slice of your life. You can do it in fiction and nonfiction. I don't recommend anyone do it with a novel fiction. It takes a very skilled writer. So let's stick with a nonfiction, factual recounting of your life. So that your kids and your family, what they want to know about you is how you survived, how you gained, how you've mastered life's challenges. And those are good stories for them. Tips for writing. Be yourself. I have many people who say to me, "Oh, I love John Grisham." Well, let's start with the premise you're not John Grisham. So write for yourself, be yourself, because as soon as you publish the book, and if you don't and you try to be someone else, you're going to lose credibility with the people who know you. And there's nothing wrong with being yourself, believe me. Errors of grammar, spelling, that stuff, that all could be fixed. And we'll get to that later, but be yourself. How to treat families, we talked about that. Try to negotiate. If you can't come to a solution, leave it out. But try to negotiate. There's one area that I find that most amateur writers, the biggest mistake they make is they lack of anecdotes. So what's an anecdote? An anecdote is a little story, can be humorous or not, that help you understand and keeps the reader moving. You want to keep the reader moving. You don't want the reader to stop and say, what does he mean by this? So the anecdote gives you some explanation. I'll give you some examples. So in the book by Gerard Doherty, who back when Ted Kennedy's first run for office, there was a famous debate against Edward McCormick, who his last summation of the debate, he turned to Ed Kennedy and said, "You know, if your name was Edward Moore, your candidacy would be a joke." And Gerard, in writing the story, recounts that, but then he says, "I saw that Ted Kennedy was getting red, and I know his anger, so I ran up to the stage and moved him off." And I said, "Yeah, but there's got to be more to that, why you moved him off." And he said, "Yes, when I got up to him, he said to me, 'I'm going to punch that son of a bitch in the mouth.'" And he said, "I wanted to prevent a real scene, so I moved him off." So that anecdote gives you a little bit of history, a little bit of amplification of those facts. Here's one of my 90-year-old men, a professor emeritus from MIT. So he writes in his book, "My wife and I decided to get divorced, and we both loved the town we were in, and we realized we had enough land so that both of us could have a house there." So he said, "I built a house out back," and that's how he wrote it. I said, "Well, that's all good, but you know, what happened to the dogs?" You talk for 150 pages about you and your wife loved the dogs. He laughs and he says, "Henry, I'm a professor of engineering. I built a tunnel between the houses so the dogs could go back and forth." So there's an anecdote that's good. So I did Casey Jones' book. So Casey writes in his book, there was 4 seconds left. We were losing to the Lakers by 1 point. We called a timeout. We go back on the court, and Larry Bird scores, and we win. I said, "Well, okay, but what do you say in the huddle that makes Larry Bird go out there and throw the winning basket? And he said, I don't say anything. He said, we get into the huddle. Larry Bird leans in and he says, give me the ball and get out of the way. And so that anecdote helps you understand.
All right.
So I did a book with Babe Ruth's daughter, and she tells the story of coming home in September from school, going by and getting in the house and going by the living room, and Babe Ruth is in there with all the shades drawn, and he's listening to the Newark Bears and he's managing the game. And if you're thinking of the great Babe Ruth, that's kind of a sad scene. And she said, my father was very unhappy that he couldn't manage. So I said, well, what's the background to that? Well, the story goes that when he retired, he went to the Yankees and said, I want to manage. And they said, well, we're quite happy with the manager we have for the Yankees, Muller Huggins, but you can manage the Newark Bears. So he went home and told his wife he's going to manage the Newark Bears. And she said, no, you're not. You're the great Babe Ruth. You're not going to manage in the minor leagues. So he acceded to his wife's issues. And then the daughter tells the story of how sad he was that picture Babe Ruth in that darkened room managing.
Wow.
I also published Wally Schirra's book about his life in space. And Wally said, in his manuscript, he said, you know, I was asked if I wanted to go back into space. I'd been there 3 times. I didn't want to go back. I said, well, don't you think you should explain it, give a little background to why don't you want to go back? So then he wrote and amplified that, and he said, I don't want to go back because, for one thing, it's pretty boring up there. He said, I was going around and around in a very confined area. I didn't want to do that again. And then he said, no one really realized how dangerous it was. Mm-hmm. Subsequent to, of course, to Wally's trips, the spaceship did blow up. But at the time, he said, most people thought it was, oh, fun and games, and up we go. But it was, he said, highly dangerous. So in writing your story, what I'm trying to get through is use anecdotes to explain some fact situations, and it keeps the reader happy. When you start to do your book, get one person, and the qualifications for that one person is he or she is honest. Mm. So if you finish a chapter, you can give it to them and say, does this make sense? Does this hold? That's key. I remember one man stood up and said, well, I think that's a great idea, Henry, and I have 3 daughters with PhDs in English. Mm. And I said, guess what? You'll never finish your book. So get one person and make sure it's an honest person, and you'll never forget it. And keep writing. I can't, that is just keep writing. I can't emphasize that enough. So if you're going to do an interview, a lot of times, you know, it's best to use a tape recorder if you can. In this age now, you probably have to do a lot of them by Zoom. But the first part of any interview, you want to tell them what it's about. You want to ask them if you can record it and give them a copy for editing. Do they agree or not agree? But engage them in the beginning with some chit-chat. Get them relaxed. Don't start right into the questions because they get defensive. So if you start, get them talking about the weather, anything, any common interest you have, and then you can have a very good interview.
Henry, that would be an interview with somebody that you're going to put into your book.
That is, as a observation about one part of your life.
Right,
yes.
got it,
Yep.
got it.
Yep. So these are just the things I talked about in the interview. Now here's another one. This is a young Soviet diplomat. Of course, at this age, he was the Russian ambassador to the UN. But in 1986, I was going to do a book with him. history happened. He went back to the Soviet Union. He was one of the planners of perestroika. We met in Moscow many times, and he said to me, you know, I'm afraid of the government. I want my kids educated in the West. So he went, and he became an ambassador to Chile, Canada, NATO, and in 2000 was ambassador to Russia. And we kept in contact over there, just as friends, really. But in 2016, we had dinner in New York. He's the Russian ambassador to the UN. He sits down. The first thing he said to me was, I wish I'd written the damn book. And unfortunately, 2 months later, he was dead.
Oh.
So if you're going to do it, do it. Be creative. And by creative, I mean, you know, you're not making a new city, a new building. Creative on a small c. Creative being your view. And when we get into the points of where you really can use some creativity and originality, it's in two areas, the title and the first line.
Mm.
So even your brain will tell you that if you're creative, if you learn something new, increase your memory, you're sending happy chemicals to your brain. So that's just another benefit of doing this project. Nonfiction, how do you get started? You simply write out an outline. It's that simple. You can do it online or on yourself. Be comfortable and don't be afraid of who you are. Just get out there and put it. Devise a schedule. Some people are morning people, some people are night people. Whatever you are, that's what you should do. That's your writing period. Look at memorabilia, things around the house. Talk to people, get feedback. You're working on your memory, so you want to get it as accurate as you can. Co-authors are fine. You know, mother, daughter, father, son, whatever. But the one rule you have to have is don't write the same thing. Again, you'll never get it finished. So assign yourself, you do this part, I'll do my part. Writer's block. You know, there's many, again, there are many solutions. Some people say, I'm not leaving my seat till I write 200 words. Other people get up and go for a walk. Other people change the font on their computer. They think that triggers the mind, changes the mind. Whatever your solution you have, and there's many solutions as there are people, so writer block is just a temporary thing, and you can get through it. Recording, this is about, some people go through this. I talked about this a little bit earlier, about those difficult times. You can do that by writing out or recording it, as long as you do it. So, first line of a book. Everyone knows it's the best of times, the worst of times. Charles Dickens. What the first line does is it grabs the reader. Right. Moby Dick, Ishmael. James Patterson has a great one, The First Time I Died. So you always want to play around with it. You know, all these things are after your book is done. You want to work on that first line. Call Me Ishmael from Moby Dick. It's the best of times, the worst of times. Title. Two stories about title. You want to make something catchy. So if you're thinking of selling your book, well, you really want to have a good title. As you're walking around and meeting people during this writing process, try out your title. If it doesn't get a reaction, it's no good. So let me give you two examples. Many years ago, there was a book, Middle Management Principles for Small Corporations. Sold about 500 copies, nothing. So the publisher pulled it back, put a new title on it. What They Don't Teach You at Harvard Business School. Sold 2 million copies. Just that title changed. That, because you only have a few seconds to grab people to pick up the book. So I did a book, The Cops Are Robbers, about 5 police officers who robbed a bank in Massachusetts. That one title, Cops Are Robbers, caught the attention of 60 Minutes, and they did a segment on it. Then HBO bought it for a movie. So title is so important.
Wow.
And there's some things in here that you can see. So here's some good ones. This first one, No One Has Sex on a Tuesday. First novel, that woman, young woman, sold 650,000 copies.
Wow.
Great title. The Vanishing of Ruth. Tempted by the Dead. Perks of Being a Wallflower. Great title. Murder by Pencil. All of these are good titles, and it just, you want to catch the eye. Self-editing, you can do it. Again, there are different techniques. It's very difficult to do it, quite frankly. I recommend using a software called Grammarly, which costs about $120, and it's excellent. You still have to read it, though, because, you know, the old there and there. A lot of these softwares won't pick up those types of things. But it's very good. And then you could, of course, get a professional,
We have 5 minutes.
a professional editor, and that's substantially more money. And that's so your manuscript is loaded into Grammarly in a market like this on the edits. Cover design, very important. You can hire, I always recommend, if you're going to have a spend about $1,000, $700 of it should be for a good cover design. And here are 3, all professionally done. Makes a difference. Self-publish. With the technology available today, I strongly recommend. So let me just briefly, because we're running out of time here, but briefly, you do your book in Microsoft Word. Then you put it into Pages using Microsoft Word, and then you save it as a PDF, all in Microsoft Word. You go to kdp.amazon.com, which is Kindle Direct, which is owned by Amazon. You register, and it'll say, do you have a manuscript in a PDF? And you say yes, and you load it up, and they say, do you want a proof? You say yes, and they'll say, what do you want on the cover? So generally you put the title, your name, and then proof. And then they'll say, how many copies do you want? And you say, I want 2. So in about 4 or 5 days in your mailbox will be 2 copies of your book, bound with blank cover with just what you put on it. You make your corrections, make them online, then it'll ask you, do you have a cover? If you do, you load that in. Or do you want help designing a cover? They have a software that you can use. And so then they say, you got the cover, you got the book, do you want the book published? You say yes, and how many? So again, we'll say you want 2. And so 4 or 5 days later in your mailbox are your 2 books, and simultaneously it is put on Amazon for sale. And it is that simple. And if you go to the website, there's all kinds of explanations on if you have anything unique or something like that, and marketing. So it's a very simple process.
So let's put on your contact for people, Henry,
Okay.
so that they know how to reach you if they want to continue with this.
There it is.
And I thank you so much. That is so fascinating what you're telling us about.
It's a
how
wonderful
to do it.
experience. I mean,
I'm sure it is.
one of my 90-year-old men got married. He was so happy.
Well, this is the thing. People love talking about themselves.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's really, I hope people will take you to heart. I hope you will take Henry's advice to heart and really give this gift, which is the most special of all gifts that you could give to your family and your loved ones. And I also want to say to all of you, and Henry, thank you again for being here. And may you all have a wonderful new year. And until then, be good, do good, be one.